Hello, and welcome to this episode of the World Discord podcast. I'm Joel Ostro.
Hello, Joel. I'm Brian Endless.
Hey, Brian. We are recording in the evening, so if I look a little sleepy, but actually, I think I'm going to wake up because this is the episode where Brian and I yell at each other,
Excellent.
as we were talking about before. So, wait, what are we talking? Oh, we're talking about how
Exploding
to
pagers.
exploding pagers and walkie-talkies.
Yep, exactly.
So over the last couple of days, it appears that Mossad, the Israeli intelligence agency, has, no matter what else we say over the next half hour or so, has carried out an incredibly complex, remarkable clandestine action. They seem to have intercepted communications relating to the purchase of a large number of pagers and walkie-talkies after Hezbollah decided in the wake of October 7th to stop using cell phones for their communications. The thought being that they could be too easily traced through cell phone tower signals, and that the use of pagers and walkie-talkies would be harder to find. And from what we know so far, there is a model of pager that is at least the model is, I don't know if it's patented or whatever, owned by a Taiwanese company.
I think they were manufactured originally in Taiwan.
Although they're saying they were manufactured in Hungary, or maybe Hungary was the distributor. They said they licensed the brand to a Hungarian company. So we don't know. The Taiwanese CEO is denying that they manufactured these pagers. But one way or another, between wherever they were manufactured, Taiwan or Hungary, and their arrival in Lebanon, so Mossad figured out which pagers were going to Lebanon, and must have had a mole somewhere along the path who opened up all of these pagers, and then presumably we don't know where the walkie-talkies are from, but also these walkie-talkies. And without altering their look or their weight, managed to insert into them explosives and triggers, some kind of signal receptor with a trigger. So at least three different components, probably more. Sealed them back up, or if it happened at the manufacturing facility, somehow somebody did this without being noticed. They were delivered to Hezbollah, and then yesterday, I'm not sure through satellite signal, or I'm not quite sure.
What we know right now is it was a phone number sent to each pager that was programmed in to trigger.
Phone number was programmed and sent to each pager. The pagers went bzzz. People took the pagers into their hands or looked at them and then got blowed up.
And I don't even think the people took them into their hands. One of the things we'll talk about here is we're going to fight about the legalities of this, but yes. I think one of the things we can agree on is we're still very much in the fog of war here. So anything we say that is a quote-unquote fact could change five times between now and
we do know there were pagers that were under the flag of a Taiwanese brand. Where they came from, we don't know.
We know that. To clarify one thing you said, we don't know that Mossad did it because Mossad's not admitting it.
So but who else could have done it?
Exactly.
Right.
Maybe
There's
the CIA.
Nobody in the world that could have pulled this off. Right. The CIA could not have pulled it off. The FSB could not have pulled it off.
This almost has to be. Yeah, this almost has to be a Mossad thing.
Absolutely.
Just again, for the audience historically, Israel's been doing this at least since the 1980s, before there were cell phones. Not this, but they have been putting explosives in phones.
For sure. Yeah.
And individual phones, that I don't know that they've ever done it in mass. They put them in individual phones even before there were cell phones, in wall phones and in phones,
like hotel rooms and stuff. Yeah,
and then in cell phones, and they've blown up individual people. Right. The other thing that we know is that it wasn't just tracing the signals. It was also, because the Hezbollah leader talked about this, it's the fact that they were afraid that at this point after October 7th, Israel was going to make a concerted effort to tap their phones.
Right.
And when Israel taps
track
phones,
their movements and all of that, then they kill people.
I've experienced this on the Rwanda side. Israel uses Pegasus software,
Yeah.
and Pegasus software, your phone does not have to be on, your
Right.
camera does not have to be on, your
Right.
microphone does not have to be on.
Right.
They can use your phone to see, to hear everything in sight, and they can get into every program that's on your phone, get all your
Right.
passwords and
Right.
everything else. Once they decide to use Pegasus, it's insanely expensive, but your phone is their
It's
phone
done.
at that point in time.
Yeah.
And that's
So
the thing that drove them. People might say, well, many people are saying, why pagers?
right.
Who uses pagers? Well, nobody uses pagers these days unless you're afraid of a government that is using
Right.
this kind of software
Right.
getting
Exactly.
into your material.
Exactly. And what's interesting is the whole thing about the model of the pagers and the Taiwanese company all came out yesterday
Yeah,
within hours after the explosions. We don't I looked just before we went on. To my knowledge, it has not been reported what these walkie-talkies were,
I
where they
haven't
were
seen
made,
that
what
yet.
the
No.
model is. I looked explicitly, and then nothing shows up
Yeah.
anywhere yet.
One,
So
one of the
that is
reasons I
also
think
interesting.
one of the reasons I think we know about the pagers is there was a source who is a friend of Hezbollah who talks to Western governments, and he gave them information about when Hezbollah ordered these pagers.
But there
So I
were
think that's
also
some of our information.
hundreds of them, and
Oh
very
yeah,
few killed.
2,800.
People maimed, but very few has people killed. So
Right. The number I had as of this morning, it might have gone up, was 12 killed,
yeah,
but thousands wounded.
right,
And the
right.
wounds we know because we've seen some of the
Seen the
videos. They were
images of people at
everything,
markets, and yeah,
yeah, everything from hands, the person at the market, and
yeah.
others. These things are on your belt,
Well, the
and it went.
hospital doctor I saw interviewed said it was within the span of an hour they had hundreds of people come in
Yeah,
with blown off hands,
yeah,
uh, gaps in their hips,
right.
and
And then also
their eyes
blinded because when your
gone.
pager
So they
goes
were
off,
looking
you
at the
do
pager.
this
Yup,
if you're anywhere near
yup,
our age
yeah,
to look at your pager. They also
right.
reported a number of kids and others and a number of civilians who were just there. And these people weren't anywhere near a battlefield. They were just, engaging in their everyday lives. The picture in the market was horrific. A
But
guy,
what
I think he
they
was picking oranges.
But both the Lebanese government and Hezbollah have reported that in both of these attacks, yesterday and today, the vast majority of casualties, dead and injured, were in fact Hezbollah.
Yes.
They blew up in rooms where people were grouped. They clearly timed this at knowing a general meeting time for Hezbollah operatives. Now, it's also important to explain. Um,
That one's
Hezbollah's,
possible. I don't necessarily agree with that. It's possible they knew it. The Mossad has great human intelligence,
yeah,
so they very well may have known it. But a lot of this does seem to be a disheartening attack against Hezbollah,
for sure.
just to show that they can get to them,
Yeah, yeah.
and that does seem to be a significant piece of this,
And
all
it
by
was and all reports from Hezbollah sources, Lebanese government sources, and more independent sources all confirmed that this was a heavy blow to
oh yeah,
Hezbollah officials. Like that, there
yeah.
was extreme damage done, maybe more than Israel has hurt Hamas in all of this war in
Yeah,
Gaza. We don't know
one of
yet.
the reports I heard late this afternoon is this by itself may mean Hezbollah is not capable of counterattacking. We
Yeah,
can talk
yeah,
about the potential for
exactly.
Hezbollah, but Hezbollah and Iran have both shown hesitancy to counterattack, and part of it may just be that Hezbollah can't at the moment; that they don't have enough people to do it at the moment.
Now, Hezbollah is a much more complicated organization than
Yes,
is Hamas.
and much bigger
They
too.
and much bigger. They have on the military side, they're almost indistinguishable from Hamas. They have basically the same doctrine of wiping Israel off the map,
Yep.
eliminating the state of Israel. They have very similar weaponry, although Hezbollah's is a bit more advanced, but not so much more compared to what Israel has.
Right.
Um,
Hezbollah has more artillery, is my
More artillery.
understanding, where Hamas can't have artillery in Gaza.
Right,
Israel just takes it out
right,
because Hezbollah is based in southern Lebanon and technically in sovereign territory.
right.
It is, while the Israelis do still take it out after Hezbollah attacks, there are certainly more of it, and they've got bigger mortars and
Yeah.
things like that they
But in
can use.
terms of like generation or age of technology. What Hezbollah has is pretty similar to what Hamas has. They don't have the
Yeah, I
most
mean,
advanced
Hezbollah
modern.
gets the direct Iranian supplies.
Yeah,
Hamas isn't
yeah,
as directly linked to Iran,
right,
but they will
right,
often get stuff from Hezbollah and from other providers. So they get reasonably modern Iranian stuff, which is well behind the
right.
Israelis thing, what the
But
Israelis.
but in Hezbollah's case, the military wing is a wing of Hezbollah. We can argue over whether it is a central or a major or the largest wing, but what we will not, I'm sure, argue about is Hezbollah is also a social services organization.
Oh,
They are
100%.
a healthcare provider.
Right,
They are a local government services provider,
right.
from trash collection to everything. Hezbollah in much of Lebanon uh, plays the role of what, well, we both live in the village of Oak Park outside of Chicago. And all of the services that the government of Oak Park
Right.
provides or contracts out for is the kind of stuff that Hezbollah provides in
Now,
much of Lebanon.
now, to be
And
fair, and I will
so,
say Hezbollah is on the high end of this. Most groups that we consider terrorist groups and most insurgent groups that hold territory are able to hold the territory because of that model, because they provide services to the people that the government, or in Israel's case, the
yeah.
occupiers, don't provide. Taliban does this, ISIS does this in
But
areas they hold.
the balance with
Not at the
Hezbollah
level of
and the
Hezbollah.
age
Yeah.
are different, right? Um, um,
And I also want to say Hamas is nowhere near what Hezbollah is. So
Nowhere near.
yeah,
They are a
Hamas.
militant organization. Like Hamas is a militant organization first. Hezbollah at best has parallel, but many would argue that much like in the case of Northern Ireland before the
I was about to
settlements,
say the IRA. Yeah, yeah,
it's
the
not
IRA
that
versus the Irish Republic versus the
correct.
army element of the IRA.
Sinn
Yeah,
Féin, yeah, yeah. So anyway, Hezbollah is a complicated organization that, for worse or for worse, is deeply enmeshed in the government of Lebanon, which is horribly sad because that was an enlightened and beautiful attempt at what Arend Leipart would have called consociational democracy after the early 80s, and it looked
right.
like it was working for a while. But unfortunately, Hezbollah was one of the political actors and continued to grow and grow with its genocidal ideology. To be
And
frank,
Syria and Iran both had a lot to do with both
with that,
worsening the situation in Lebanon and also with building up Hezbollah.
100%. So there's our background.
One other thing we should talk about before we go on to the current day is people need to realize that the border with Lebanon and
That's where I was going.
Israel has never been secure since the 1980s. There
No,
are at least weekly and often daily shells that go across this border, and
in
this is
both
something that
directions.
in both directions, and what Americans just aren't used to. But I read UN reports of this stuff as
Yeah,
a hobby at one point in time, and the UN report might be two mortar shells go across from the Lebanese side in what is believed to be Hezbollah territory.
right.
Israel responds with artillery, or Israel responds with planes, or whatever the case might be.
And reporting
And
is largely stopped because it's every day.
exactly. But also Israelis live with this. Now the Lebanese live with this too. On the Israeli side, these are settlements that, and just like the ones near Gaza, have bomb shelters either in the homes or in every community. And they regularly have air raid sirens going off, and they regularly have to go to those bomb shelters.
Although the
And the
difference, well, oh, you said Gaza, because I was going to say, unlike the settlements by the West Bank, these are undeniably within
right,
Israeli
no, next
territory.
to
These are
Gaza, not
not
next to the
settled.
West Bank.
These are
Yeah,
not the settlers.
no, these are
These
not an
are people who
occupied
just live
territory.
near the Lebanese border.
Exactly.
And that whole border area after October 7th was largely evacuated. So there are
100%,
the
because
internally
the attacks
displaced is
increased so
widespread.
much. Yeah.
Right.
No,
Right.
the attacks were normal and then they increased. And in Israel and Israel's borders, this doesn't count as open warfare. This is
Right.
just daily stuff.
Right. Right.
It's a horrific situation, and the same on the Lebanese side.
Yeah.
There aren't that many people who aren't part of Hezbollah in southern Lebanon because it gets bombed all the time, and because it gets bombed out, and civilians who are there are again constantly under fire. So these are
And this is
very
where we'll
tough places.
start to probably start yelling at each other because I
Excellent.
would posit that Israel's situation with Lebanon is different than Israel's situation with the West Bank or Gaza. Now, that's an obvious statement, but what do I mean by that? That Israel, I don't think anyone could say that Israel has designs on Lebanon. In other
Israel
words,
has
they're not
Israel has
settling
designs on southern Lebanon because of Hezbollah, not on Lebanon.
because of, were it not for Hezbollah,
Right.
Israel and Lebanon presumably could live in peace.
Mhm.
Israel doesn't have designs on Lebanese territory. They don't even have um, much problem with the Lebanese government other than the Hezbollah part of it and
Right.
and
But that
and
is
and the allowing
integrated
in,
with Lebanon right now.
right? And Hezbollah is at war with Israel.
Right.
And so and Israel is pretty careful to make Israel. I don't think you'll ever hear Israel say that they're at war with Lebanon.
No,
They will say
and
they're at war with Hezbollah.
yeah, they are at war with the terrorists, and with Hezbollah as a terrorist group is what they'll say.
Yeah. But I do think that makes it because you can legitimately like Israel's situation, certainly with Gaza, is different. They control it, they occupy it, they blockade it, even before October 7th, right? Gaza doesn't get water if Israel doesn't allow it. Gaza doesn't get medication if Israel doesn't allow it.
Yeah,
Gaza doesn't exist, and that's you can say that's because of Hamas, but then you can look at the West Bank, and it's a little bit better, and the
right.
emphasis is on a little bit, not on the better,
And not so much anymore. Even it's getting
and
worse.
not anymore.
So the difference, and we're agreeing here on this one, and we might disagree a little bit in what I'm about to say.
That's what we're
I,
going to disagree on because of
I'm
this
going to say
agreement.
something from the Palestinian perspective in Gaza and the West Bank, and from the perspective of most of the Arab world. From the Palestinian perspective, another thing Americans don't understand is pretty much everything Israel does is illegal from a Palestinian perspective
Correct.
because those territories are illegally occupied. And the fact that there is an illegal occupation, and the world still views it as an illegal occupation in a legalistic sense, makes anything that Israel does there illegal. That doesn't mean that the people who live there can engage in terrorist actions and that those actions somehow magically become legal. They do not.
I think it is
But it's a
important
very
to
complicated
distinguish
situation.
and to clarify because in today's environment, what you just said can be twisted in ways that you would not agree with.
Oh,
I'm
100%. No,
99.9% certain.
I
Right?
want to be
Illegal
very
meaning
clear.
because what Brian and I are not saying is that the state of Israel is an illegal entity.
No, in
The
no way, shape.
occupation of the territories in the West Bank and Gaza
Right,
are the illegal thing. The
correct.
settler communities, and all of the rest. There's what Israel does in relation to the West Bank and Gaza
Right.
is
I am
the
on
great
record, and I
legal
believe
international
you
law.
were the same in previous episodes. So it's good to be on record here, just
Yes,
for a separate tape. I have complete personal belief in the right of the state of Israel to exist. I also believe the Palestinian people
right,
have a right to a state and a place to exist. And the problem is figuring out how the two of them can
right,
coexist, and that's where we've had conflict since 1948 and before. But to
right,
say that the state of Israel does not have a right to exist is completely and utterly wrong and not what we're saying
right.
at all. Now,
But
the
there's a
occupied
lot out
the
there
territory,
that calls Israel itself an illegal occupation
right?
in that territory, and that is not.
That is not something either of us would agree.
No,
Now, the question of Israel occupying the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, and the Golan Heights, and West Bank and Gaza are important because there are Palestinian civilians there, but those are, according to international law, illegally occupied territories.
right,
Yeah, there
and
we
part
agree,
of.
and good. Thank you for clarifying.
But let's talk about Lebanon, and
Yes,
let's talk about the explosive pagers and walkie-talkies.
yes.
So, to give our listeners some context, uh, Brian made, I don't know if it's still up. I read a social media post from Brian
I
that
don't take my
referenced
social media posts down; I fight them out.
that if I can encapsulate, or should I caricature it and lampoon it,
You
or
may
should
do.
I try to
You may
faithfully
do either.
report
You can be
it?
as honest or as caricature as you want
that
to, and I'll fight it.
that the actions uh, the explosions of these pagers and other devices constitutes a terrorist attack by Israel.
Yep.
That was Brian's,
And
and
and I do stand by that. Given
no, you're
the,
sitting.
I sit by that. Thank you.
And I
Can I
responded,
say ass on this show? Sure, it's our show.
"Sure, yeah, yeah, yeah." And I
Um,
responded
so,
strongly
so here's the deal. We have
against
a
that.
situation in which there is a my perspective, we have a situation in which there is a cross-border conflict between Israel and Hezbollah.
Mhm.
When Hezbollah launches artillery into Israel, Israel has a right to respond to that, to self-defense, to respond to that. That is a factual statement, and I don't think any laws of war or anything else would question that. The question becomes when Israel makes a mass use of what are legally called booby traps, booby trap devices, in this case, against people who are not congregated in a battle zone. And that is both a question of
Hezbollah does not congregate in battle zones.
they do congregate in battle zones. They congregate around artillery. They congregate on the field in southern Lebanon. If they're at a base of theirs, which might just be a camp, that is very different than standing in a grocery store. That is very different than being in their home. You could even make an argument that if a bunch of them were together, if 20 Hezbollah leaders were together, Israel might have a right to attack that because that would probably be a planning meeting of some type. The question, though, is when does this become an act that is beyond war? And my suggestion is this is an act that is beyond war.
I would argue that it's targeted. If Israel had launched missiles where, so suppose, I don't know how do we have a count on the pagers? It was hundreds, right?
2,800 was the number they're throwing.
2,800, so thousands. If they'd launched, so 2,800 things blew up.
Right.
If they had sent 2,800 bombs from short range ballistic missiles, and those bombs all landed in the place where those pagers blew up, that would have been an indiscriminate
Yes.
attack. And we would have no disagreement that those
Right.
are, I don't
It,
even know, war crimes
however,
covers it.
right.
But
However, this is not just a question of discrimination. That's one of the things that is going on. It's not just discrimination. So first, let me make an analogy for you, and I think it's a very good analogy.
I think
What
it's
would
bad, and I haven't heard it yet.
exactly? Um, what would America say? What would we say if all at the same time tomorrow morning the cell phones of 2,800 military and government officials in the United States exploded all at the same time?
Would
And
call it
we
war.
found out that Hezbollah did it. What would we call it?
Probably would call it terrorism, but I think
Yes,
the United States of America would act as if we were at war.
we would call it
And
terrorism and
for
consider it an act
propaganda
of war.
reasons, not for legal reasons.
Well,
The the
it
the
would legally be terrorism too, and
I don't
terrorism can be considered an act of war, and it would be an act of war.
I
So
don't think
Israel
I mean,
clearly committed an act of war. There's nobody. I don't think you question that. That on anybody's
Israel's at
calendar, this
war with
was an
Israel.
act of war, right?
But Israel is
But
not, certainly not targeting and at all non-Hezbollah individuals. Now we go back to our earlier conversation.
there are
Do
some
they
Hezbollah
know
individuals
that
who are
there
not
will
strictly
be?
military leaders.
But I think it's different than the way they are carrying out Gaza, where they were leveling buildings and knowingly, purposefully depopulating places. This is clearly their intent, and I'm using that word because we also use it in genocide. We don't necessarily use it with terrorism, but probably should in some way in a
So,
definition. The intent was to take out Hezbollah military officials. They were not even in the hands, as far as we know, of those who are completely separate from the Hezbollah military operation. Again, this comes from Hezbollah itself and the Lebanese government. So this
so
is supremely targeted towards people involved in military affairs.
well,
Hezbollah's
it
army.
is arguably targeted, but targeting requires you to see the target, not to put something in the hands of
Define
someone.
C.
They have to be within your perception. It can be a drone, it can be a satellite, but they have to be within your perception. So, if, as an example, there was an Israeli agent who walked out of a room where 20 people from Hezbollah were there and triggered all these pagers, no question that one's an easy one to say that's just a part of war. Let me read you something though, because
I
I'm
think
going
you're
to the
full of
law
shit.
here. I'm going to take you to the law here.
Ukraine sends GPS guided drones because many of their drones now are GPS guided. They're not controlled by people with joysticks because they're launching way too many of these MFers.
Right, but
And
if they
they
don't
launch
target,
them
if they
at,
don't target it
if they
with
what?
with if they don't target it specifically, it is indiscriminate. If you launch a drone
They
and you're
target
not
those drones specifically to hit the oil facilities or airfields, and they're killing people.
right,
And
if they
Israel
it,
targeted these pagers and cell phones specifically. They knew whose
they
hands they were
they
going
knew
into.
they knew they were in the hands of people for months and they had no idea where the people were.
Doesn't
That's
matter.
not
They knew. They
indiscriminate
knew
targeting.
who their targets were, and they got them.
That is indiscriminate targeting because they don't know who's around. They don't know what's happened to those pagers. They don't know if the
Look,
oranges next
Ukraine
to the guy
launches
are
those
going to
drones.
blow up.
They don't know if, like, the brother and sister are having lunch with the soldier.
By the way, I consider a number of U.S. drone strikes in countries that we're not at war
Whoa,
with
whoa,
to
whoa!
at
We're not
least be
talking
war
about
crimes.
the technology is different now. We can't. We're not talking
So,
about the
but
mid
that's drones. Now let's go
2010s.
back. Let's go back to pagers because I want to be very specific to pagers here,
Well,
and I
it's
would like to quote
explosives
you.
in the end. It's
I would
not the
like to
drones
quote
or the
you.
pagers. It's who are we blowing up?
That is incorrect. The pagers are
It is
important.
correct.
The
Go ahead.
CCW, the Conventional Weapons Convention. I have no idea why the Conventional Weapons Convention is called the CCW, but it is. So I'm
That's
going to
cool.
call it exactly. I'm going to call it the CCW. The CCW explicitly deals with booby traps. A booby trap, quote, is any device or material which is designed, constructed, or adapted to kill or injure and which functions unexpectedly when a person disturbs or approaches an apparently harmless object or performs an apparently safe act. Pagers, cell phones, etc., all fit under
Well,
this
the
booby
holders of
trap
those pagers didn't do
definition.
anything. They were just walking or sitting.
No, but this
They
is the
didn't
booby trap.
trigger anything. Israel triggered it.
Right. If the booby trap is triggered by someone outside, it doesn't matter. It is considered to be a booby trap if it is a normal object that you would use. It falls under that. And what the rules are about booby traps explicitly on this one is that they need to be either in the close vicinity of a military objective, which is
Which they were.
considered a base, battlefield or something like that,
Or
and
personnel.
that measures are taken to protect civilians from the effects, for example, the posting of warning sirens, the issue of warnings, and the provision of fences. So they're talking about you have to basically do what you do with a minefield and let people know the minefield is there. The triggering of booby traps, though, on someone who is in a civilian location is directly against the CCW, is a
Okay,
violation of this law
but
of war.
here's where we diverge, right? There is no way for Israel to wage its side of Hezbollah's war against Israel because Hezbollah, like Hamas, enmeshes itself in civilian zones.
Right.
Hezbollah's military leadership, Hezbollah's military commanders, Hezbollah's military junior commanders are enmeshed in society throughout Lebanon
And
in
you
three
are
particular regions. Israel only. Now, we have to assume there's pagers all the frick over Lebanon, but they were only triggered in three regions. They are the three regions where
now.
they know the majority of, not the majority, all of the pagers would be in the hands of Hezbollah military officials who are concentrated in those three areas. That's the
But they
only
don't
place
they
they've
don't know
triggered
who is
them.
near them. They
They
do
have
it when
no other way to wage war against Hezbollah's
this is
military.
the problem with asymmetric warfare. This
But
is This is what the
Right.
terrorists have. Now, hang on. I'm not saying this is right. This is morally horrific. I don't want to say this is what the terrorists
It's
do is
all
in any way.
horrific. We have no
It is, yeah.
disagreement there.
But when you are fighting your major power, fighting against an asymmetric power, that doesn't mean you can do things haphazardly, without direct sight, without direct planning
And
in
that's
civilian
what Israel's
areas.
doing in Gaza. It's not even haphazard. It's just quasi genocidal.
Right. And I'm
At
not quite
least,
going there yet, but certainly
at least
war crimes.
quasi genocidal. Right? They depopulated the area.
I say in terms of
This is
genocide
discriminate,
that
and that's where we
this
digress.
is not
Given its
discriminate.
asymmetrical warfare, this is as targeted, as discriminate as Israel can do, short of sending
And the problem is,
2,800 unidentifiable Mossad agents and individually assassinating people. That is not realistic. It's not possible.
so
Israel cannot fight back
two
against
two
Hezbollah.
problems. Two problems. The first is, this is a case of major states using the excuse of we can't do it any other
Oh,
way because
Jesus.
we're not
Tell me
willing to
how
send
else they
troops.
can do it.
Well,
I
but
think this is freaking
but
genius.
this is major states violating the laws of war by saying this. They have violated the CCW in
Fair.
doing this.
Fine.
This is a weapon you're not civilized states, civilized, very important, civilized states are not supposed to use.
You can
The
say they
problem,
violated the CCW, but I will not say that they have violated the laws of crimes against humanity, and
here,
certainly not
here is,
genocide.
I don't think they have actually. I don't think they have violent crimes against humanity here. War crime, not a crime against humanity. They're different. However,
I don't
the
think it's a war crime
problem
either.
with terrorism is, and this is one of the reasons we don't have a definition of terrorism, and one of the reasons we're fighting over this, and neither of us can quote a definition of
I
terrorism
can.
that doesn't exist. It doesn't exist.
They do exist.
However, it
There's a
doesn't
there's
exist.
a law, international law on the crime of terrorism. It exists,
There's no
and the United
convention
States
that
has
people
a
have
law
signed.
on terror. Huh?
There's no convention that people have signed. So back to the point, though. What has happened here is Israel has effectively, as major states have done in the past, done something that is seen as a horrific criminal action by the people on the other side that are involved. One of the easiest definitions of terrorism is it terrorizing the other side in a way that they can't fight back against? And in this case, as in many other cases where drone strikes are often considered terrorism, yes, this is intended to terrorize. This is
Nah.
intended to terrorize the soldiers inside of Hezbollah and the will to fight of Hezbollah,
They
but
have a
it's
right to
also,
terrorize the soldiers.
but they're in civilian areas and they're terrorizing civilians. I was terrorized watching that freaking video of the guy picking oranges. That was horrific. And there were 15 civilians in that video just standing around watching as Israel blew someone up in a supermarket. I'm going to say the 15 Lebanese civilians standing around see that as terrorism. That's one of the
But that
things
doesn't
we
matter
have.
how they see it. Like, of course
It
they see it
absolutely
that way, and it's
does matter.
legitimate. Fine. Of course they see it as terrorism, but that's not what we're talking about. We're asking,
But
is it?
and
And
what this does
intent
is
matters.
it creates more will to help the people of Hezbollah, to help the fighters in Hezbollah. This is the problem in Gaza.
So then
Israeli
Israel has
activity.
to give up and cease to exist as a state and let
Okay, I've
Hezbollah
actually
destroy it.
I've made suggestions before. I'm going to go back to the freaking FBI handbook and to the U.S. military handbook, and I'm going to say what they should be doing instead of doing this fighting that's been going on since 1948 and 1967 is winning hearts and minds. You want to get the people of Gaza, as an example, to not support Hamas? You give them schools and food, and you give them houses, and they will be turning over Hamas to you after time if you do
Maybe it
that.
might be trickier in Gaza.
But
Lebanon,
but
you
but
might,
but, but,
you
but
might
with Hezbollah only exists as part of the alignment of states that are against Israel,
Iran and
predominantly
Syria.
because of exactly Iran, because primarily Syria and others, because of Israel's treatment of Palestinians. Israel has choices. Israel has failed in their
We don't
choices.
disagree on that. We don't
And
disagree.
I don't think many Israelis disagree with this either.
No.
This is one of those things that Americans need to realize too. Most Israelis believe that this should be over. that there should be two states. This current Israeli government, which has been in power for a long time, and governments before them engage in these actions knowing full well they make peace harder. They
Most
do not
Iranians
make
feel the same thing
it
about their
easier.
government, as you and I well know,
Absolutely.
right?
Absolutely.
But
These are
but
governments that
there
are
are
not
moments
supported by the
where
people.
we and Israel and others have to fight against Iran, and
You don't have to fight
Hezbollah is
this
an arm of
way.
it, huh?
You don't have to
Well,
fight
with
this way.
Hezbollah, the way they're configured, I don't think there's any other way that Israel can fight them. I don't. I mean, you got the hearts and minds thing, but that's okay. We're now in 2024. That's gone. They squandered that opportunity decades ago.
I think they
Fine.
can pick up that opportunity again anytime, but it takes time. But the question is, if they don't pick up that opportunity, what's their other choice?
Okay,
It's kill
this is a
everyone.
different argument. I just wanted to yell at you about the pagers and the
I'm
walkie-talkies.
going to say the pagers are more complicated than the pagers. It's not just about pagers. And that's the problem. When we see
But
things like this, every time Israel creates something new like this, and they're insanely creative, and we agree,
they're really good at it.
Mossad is just incredible at this evil shit that they do. And they're coming up with the most evil ways to kill people. Every time this happens, it brings more people to the violent Palestinian side. It shows more
Maybe, but
people
let's
to Israel.
consider this. We know, and it's so hard, right? You and I both push back at but they did this before, but they did this before, but they did this before, because you don't get to a future solution. So it is clear Israel and Iran have been carrying out assassinations and attacks back and
Yeah,
forth and back and forth. And there was one recently where Israel took out a Hezbollah commander, the Hamas
in Lebanon.
leader,
Yeah. Oh, and then in
and
Iran.
Iran promised and Hezbollah promised a massive response. That hasn't come yet.
Right.
But we know, and I think we can trust that Hezbollah was organizing something. I think it's fair
What
that Israel would have expected that. So, given that, Israel has a right to preempt an attack in
I
a
and I
general sense.
a
In a general,
preemptive. I would argue that a preemptive conventional military strike into southern Lebanon would be more legal than this.
but they couldn't do that because of the way Hezbollah's military is organized. So, if we find out, and there's confirmation that this act happened at this time in this way to prevent a large scale Hezbollah coordinated attack, maybe with jihad and others
I don't
against
think that
Israel.
was coming anyway.
I don't
I mean,
know.
has but one of the things
But
with
either
Hezbollah
way,
at
it
the
doesn't
start.
matter. Israel's fighting against Hezbollah.
We're
I
talking
think
about
it's
this
legitimate.
with Iran and Hezbollah at the start.
Yeah.
Hezbollah probably would have been in earlier,
Yeah.
but Hezbollah is in a position where if they actually try to fight and enter Israel, they get wiped out
They'll get
because
wiped out.
they
That's
would
why
they
they're
would have to.
constituted the way
They,
they are. And that's why it's
exactly,
so
and
hard
that's
to
why
fight against them.
they engage in asymmetrical terrorist actions because of that.
Let me ask you
Absolutely,
it this way. If, so you got to start, you have to accept the if.
yes.
Israel has decided it needs to take out a large number of Hezbollah military commanders. You have to accept that. Is there any
It,
way to do that? There are
it
then
is.
choices. Did they not choose the least generally destructive way to take out a large number of Hezbollah military officials?
They chose an illegal way that included doing it in civilian areas, and that's
In a
where the
way
problem
that
lies to me.
caused the least amount of non-Hezbollah casualties possible. I
Possibly.
don't see
That
how they
that
could have done it
that's the if
another way
that's the
and
if that
taken
we
out
can't know
fewer.
about. And the problem is when this goes off the battlefield, it gets into insanely murky places in terms of whether it's the correct thing to do
And
in war.
then we're
And
going
it's
to
hard
have
to
something.
say. It's hard to use the words.
I'm going
What's
to
that?
quote. I'm going to quote you.
Yes.
Then Hezbollah's military wing should wear fatigues and have military bases and ammunition depots and be a military in the
I
open.
think the Israelis should dress in blue and Hezbollah should dress in red, or vice versa. and they can meet on the battlefield.
Which one's the blue? The Democrats? Yeah, okay.
Right. No, I was going for the Revolutionary War when
I know where you were going.
when the Americans were the terrorists fighting against the Brits.
Right.
We hid behind trees and bombed barracks. But we won in the end, so we're founding fathers.
And in some ways, what Israel did was the Barney Fife. If you remember that episode, Andy Griffith, how do you fight fire? And Barney's answer is with fire, and Andy's answer is with a hose.
Right.
But Israel has chosen to fight fire with fire.
No.
Right. Hezbollah
yes.
All of their attacks are terrorist attacks without exception.
It's fire with fire. It's also, though, to go back to the question of how you solve this, to an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind. And that's all we've seen here. And this is just another escalating example of this doesn't help anything. This may head off an attack if they knew an attack was
for a while. It's going to weaken Hezbollah for a long time.
Yeah, but what happens besides that? How many more people join?
That's what Israel doesn't do, right? What Israel ought to do is not what Israel's going to do, because, as we agree, the Netanyahu government has no interest in that, either in relations with Lebanon or in the West Bank or in Gaza.
One of the biggest issues here is that the leaders of Israel have no interest in
peace.
And this is a great way
no interest in their own people, to repeat what we said in prior.
This is a great way for them to push again to not have peace. I think
this is a good place to end, or I'm going to start yelling at you.
I think it is. No, we've agreed. No, Gaza and West Bank picked up, and now Hezbollah and Lebanon, and that's what we're seeing here.
And this, maybe the sad part is that Netanyahu can increasingly say that he has decapitated or partially decapitated Hamas and now partially decapitated Hezbollah, and in some twisted, sick way thinks that he's getting closer to declaring some kind of victory, which is
he's pushing for PR points inside of Israel. There's no question about that. And he's going to get some. I mean, I think there are definitely people who love the fact that this action happened. And probably there are very few Israelis who disagree with that until we see later that it had negative effects.
I mean, and I wouldn't say I love it, but I'm not. We 100% agree. Would that there were zero non-Hezbollah casualties. Right. That clearly. But what I am willing to say until evidence makes it farcical, that what Israel did was pretty genius way to minimize non-Hezbollah casualties, and it even seems like made that, if not a priority, a really important piece of this action.
And I think that's giving them too much credit. I think they were trying to decapitate Hezbollah and didn't really care who got in the way.
But I'll tell you this is how we know it was Mossad and not the IDF or any other branch of the Israeli government, because the casualties, you have to agree, would have been, if it had been an Israeli military action, it would have, we would be saying, what the hell did Israel just do? Both of us.
But Mossad, sadly,
Mossad's better.
We're talking about this in a horrific way. Mossad understands the benefit of injuring rather than killing, for the fact that it has psychological damage against the people on the other end, and just as much or more psychological damage.
And they understand the need to not take out the illegitimate targets, right? They understand targeting for all. It's an intelligence agency, so they understand that.
No, Mossad engages in much more surgical strikes than IDF does. Absolutely.
Right. Okay, let's leave it at that.
We agreed in the end.
Thank you for tolerating our shenanigans here, and we'll be back next week.
People who actually watch all the way through have never seen us fight before, so this is fun.
Yeah.
By the way, people, this is how you constructively argue about difficult topics.
Oh, but when we stop, I'm going to call him an ignorant slut, just like Dan Aykroyd.
Well, yeah, thank you. By the way, be careful though, Joel. Most human beings don't understand that you're quoting Saturday Night Live, and you just said a bad thing if they don't know that.
Yeah, well, Google Weekend Update Saturday Night Live and Dan Aykroyd. If you can spell Aykroyd, you'll find him.
You say my butt once, I'm saving your butt the second time. Joel doesn't know what he said. It's okay.
Our family members will understand.
Exactly.
Okay. All
Thank
right.
you,
Until
folks. Thank
next
you for
time.
watching.
Thank you, folks, and thank you, Andy, for producing. And we'll see you next time.